Hello and welcome to the Cafe Genius Impresarios show, episode 2. Today, as I'm recording this, it is March 9, 2023, and I'll try to publish it today as well. So welcome to another episode. This is Solo, your host, once again, Dan Hugo. I'm sort of in charge of the Cafe Genius project, a multifaceted undertaking, mostly aimed at experimental meetups and gatherings and pursuits of projects in our entrepreneurial ecosystem here in the Las Vegas area and possibly beyond, and so on and so on. So it's sort of a platform of experimentation, not an actual entity, if you're curious, not a corporation or a nonprofit, anything. It's more of a club, if we had to go with some sort of official designation. So more than a meetup group, less than a legal entity. So let's get started then. Today's episode is entitled Past Fails. That is supposed to be a little play on words. Failure is okay. The entrepreneurial world is full of it. Roughly speaking, there's an 80% chance any given startup will fail, and that startup could be a restaurant, it could be a solo effort, it could be any small business, anything really, anything with or without funding. Obviously, that's not a precise number in all cases. Some things will skew it in either direction, but that's the topic of today. So so failure is always an option. If you're an Apollo 13 movie fan, you know that failure was not an option, but not an actual quote from in the situation at the time. But it is a nice sentiment. Unfortunately, not true if you are starting a company, but if you, as you begin your journey down the road of entrepreneurialism, failure is something to always be aware of and consider. And that's why we're talking about it. So every startup notion, whether it's a restaurant, and my family started a restaurant when I was about 10 years old. A family history of extended families owning, members owning restaurants and whatnot. So it's kind of in the family tree, I guess, to have a restaurant or take that entrepreneurial road. So a restaurant is perfectly legitimate, a form of entrepreneurialism, but then most things are. If you're venturing out of the realm of employment and into self-determinism, for better or worse. So if you have an idea, that's obviously where things begin. There are any number of ways to come up with ideas, observing a pain point, just some sort of creative, better way of doing something. So you could argue that there's a pain point in the not better way, but it may not be immediately obvious that it's a pain point that you're solving, but more of an efficiency. But either way, you have a way of doing something better, of offering something better, more appealing, in a better place, more accessible, whatever it is. All kinds of possibilities. So the first thing you got to do, and I'll apologize now, my allergies are acting up. You might be able to hear it in my voice. I'm going to take a little drink here, a little homemade soda. So you may have this idea, and then the first thing you got to do is be able to tell it to someone else. So you have to be able to describe it, and that's critical. Then you want to turn that description into an actual story, a story that makes sense, a story that's appealing. Humans like stories. They get attention, they draw us in, they may push us away. But the ability to turn your idea into a story that makes sense, that has some sort of structure, like I can't tell you that there's a best structure, or you're not talking a hero's journey, although sometimes you might be. But really, it's you want to lead the person you're pitching to, or describing your idea to, or telling your story to down a path to a conclusion where you do end up being the hero, or your startup idea does, at any rate. So one of the things that we do with the Cafe Genius project is to enable pitch workout rooms. It was an idea that it's certainly inspired. It's not an original idea. It was inspired by any open mic. If you've ever seen open mic comedy or open mic music or even slam poetry or anything similar. You get up in front of an audience, you have a mic, and it's all you. So in January of 2022, I was speaking with Josh Levitt at our Bootstrappers Breakfast, which is an unrelated meetup that I'm an organizer and host of. And I said, hey, my own version of a pitch, I guess. Hey, we need a way to have people turn ideas into pitches that they can make in front of people to get started. A good idea doesn't sprout from a couch. If you're sitting there thinking someday I would like to, well, why not get up in front of people and get some feedback, right? So the pitch workout room was born. The story was convincing, apparently. And I think it was 11 days later, we had our very first pitch workout room, full room, 5 minutes pitch, leave out the money because nobody's writing you a check. It's literally just the story part. 5 minutes of feedback. Don't be mean. Very, very simple. The rest of it was driven by each person that got up and did their presentation. There was no requirement to have a slide deck or even to be ready. A couple people, I want to say probably Martin and Matt, not Matt Lau. Matt Lau went second. He was already prepared, but had never given his presentation in front of people. So he had a full slide deck, maybe too many, and got up in front of people. And like I said, other people did not come as prepared, but just got up and started talking. And that was the beginning of actually putting together a pitch and with a story and maybe some a slide deck, some slides and some illustration, and then later some numbers and all the stuff that a real investor might like to see. But the ability to tell your story in front of people is a critical component, and that's one of the things we focus on. And we've kind of discovered along the way in that 2022, now we're in 2023, the Las Vegas entrepreneurial ecosystem has a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that work and a lot of things that may not. And that's in other episodes and possibly other productions, we'll cover all these things. But for the moment, let us presume that the entrepreneurial ecosystem is made up of people who are ready, I guess. That may not be a pleasant word in this context, but people that are ready to accept the risks and the challenges, and others who have a fear of missing out, and we'll call those people Wantrepreneurials. I don't mean this make this sound like an us-them thing, but sometimes the desire to be entrepreneurial is slightly ahead of I'll call it the ability to be, or the preparedness to be entrepreneurial. So having a good idea is great, and that is actually essential. Path to execution helps, the ability to tell the story, but also there's always the possibility that there will be, in fact, 80% or so, that there will be some failure outcome, and it may or may not be because of a predictable factor. It may have just been you're in the 80%. So it could be anything from being unprepared, not being able to pivot, or not being able to find people to help or find the funding, or there's any number of reasons, or it could just be not a great idea. And that is something to be ready for. So the whole reason for this episode today is to plant the seed of this discussion that, first of all, the entrepreneur may, again, not have accounted for a variety of ways that failure could occur, but even entrepreneurs do this sometimes. And so that brings us towards the end of the show notes. By the way, this stuff will all be in the show notes wherever you find this podcast. The idea doesn't necessarily mean success is imminent. The 80-20 rule, the Pareto principle, these things are commonly discussed for a reason. And like I said, there's any number of reasons things could fail. So the important part, and something that we want to somehow and expose to people, I suppose, or enable discussions around, or enable some education and discussion, is to take the pitch workout room concept and maybe flip it around into a failure pitch, as in, here's what I did and here's why it didn't work, or maybe why it didn't work. So that failures from the past, PAST, are actually passed on to the future, even if it's for oneself, right? Learning from our failures is essential. In fact, anyone who's ever created a startup will say that failure absolutely must be a learning experience, not the end of a story, but the beginning of the next one. So, and that's one of the principles to introduce in that setting, is that your idea may well fail. I mean, 80% is 80%, right? So even if you do things great, right, you may well be the next Yahoo. And even though Yahoo was around before Google, if I can pick on these giant companies, but at some point, Google was just a weird spelling of a mathematical term, and Yahoo with an exclamation point was just an expression that one might have heard in a Western television show, or maybe in real life. So these were ideas. They were pursued by their founders, and they had funding and various things going for them. But obviously, the entire internet stacked against them in some cases. Each chose a different path, and arguably one has been very successful and one not so much. So knowing these things in advance will probably at least prepare the emotional side of the effort. Failing cannot possibly lead to sort of a self-destruction or a total collapse or giving up completely. It's something that has to be on the agenda. In fact, it's arguable that there should be an assumption of failure. And I'll tell my version of what I think we should talk about shortly. But at the very least, if you're not going to assume, then you should at least accept it, that it's a possibility, right? You can assume you're going to succeed. You're going to succeed, but that, anything's possible. So I personally, first of all, the Wantrepreneurialism video, the Wantrepreneurialism term, I should say, came up in this video that I came across on the YouTube, which is itself, that YouTube should have failed a long time ago, but no, they didn't. That's good. And then Google bought them, and that was kind of a game changer for them, probably. So there was a great video, which I've linked in the show notes. If you're familiar with CoffeeZilla, he's been doing some breaking news coverage about various rug pulls and drama in the crypto and NFT and blockchain. Not so much blockchain, I suppose, but the areas of around the blockchain that people have been talking about quite a bit. So he's gained some fame recently, but still a decent journalist, I guess, if he calls himself that. But some good stuff. And somewhere earlier in 2022, he had a really nice interview with a professor, and you can check out the video. If you search for if you search on YouTube, same thing, for CoffeeZilla and fake entrepreneurs, you'll come up with this video, and I'm linking to it in the show notes. They have about an hour discussion, and I found all of it, the entire hour, to be intriguing, interesting, apropos. So he does talk about entrepreneurialism, and he goes into some detail about the failing, the notion of failing, how it's often ignored or sort of not considered seriously, right? Much more concerned about success and the dream of launching a successful startup, finding success, funding and exiting if that's your thing, or having a great restaurant or a packed coffee house that everybody talks about, whatever it is, whatever your endeavor might be. So if we enter these projects and ventures and adventures without considering the possibility of failure, then we'll be crushed when it 80% of the time or so happens. So yeah, likely accepting failure is critical. Knowing that it's going to happen is important, but accepting it is critical because it is likely, and that is a fact. So there's one of the exercises I would like to do is to, like I said, assume that failure is a possibility. you can assume you're going to fail. That is not always best for morale, but assume that failure is the possibility that it is, and that you will have to deal with it or be able to pivot away from it if you see it coming. So if you can see failure modes coming because you've thought about them ahead of time, not the gross ones like we run out of money. I mean, that one you can plan for that every day, and you still won't be ready for the big unexpected things, right? That happens in real life. But if you are only prepared for those big things, you haven't considered what happens if there's a global pandemic, or what happens if the infrastructure in your locality fails completely due to weather, floods, fires, whatever. Every airplane always has a second landing place. There's handoffs between things. They're assuming problems, right? And they account for them. And that's just one example, but it's one I just came up with off the top of my head. But if you are ready ahead of time, if you've thought them through, and this is what I would like to pursue as one of our a component of Pitch Workout Room, perhaps, or completely separately, is to consider. And I like to use SWOT as a great example because it's very simple. I mean, it doesn't get simpler. I have used SWOT when we were forming an owners association for mobile vendors here in Vegas. I have used it for other projects. It's super easy to understand. It's a very simple acronym. There's no training required. And if you've not heard of SWOT, I have another link, even though it's kind of humorous, but I have a link in the notes for HBO, the Silicon Valley series, which is a great pop culture reference, but not a documentary. But in this case, Jared, one of the team, explains SWOT to them, and it's kind of fun, but it is very simple, and I will step through that very quickly. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. So I believe, based on what I've seen so far over the year of doing pitch workout rooms at Tech Alley, if you're not familiar, Tech Alley, the third Saturday of every month, we had it at 9 a.m. So people who were driven to arrive early, because the event starts at 10. So we were the only thing happening before Tech Alley at Tech Alley. So people who were motivated enough to show up would either participate as an audience member, giving feedback, or actually pitching, or both. And very often the story was about, which is appropriate, the story is about the strengths of the ideas and the opportunities, because this is about the story and it is about starting the journey. So, and I always say, don't talk about money. Nobody has a checkbook. They're not funding you based on today. This is literally the beginning of the beginning even. But I think what comes next is, as the idea and story start to kind of get dialed in a little bit, and what are we really trying to accomplish with this idea that we're pitching to people? What's eventually the money, and what are we doing? What do we need? What's the ROI? All the TAMs and all the stuff. But there's always the real possibility that has to be considered, if not talked about in great detail in a presentation, is that the whole thing could collapse. And I will give an example, and why I think failure, even if it's the obvious outcome, is not reason enough to give up, but it is something to account for. So like I said, so people often are considering the strengths and opportunities. Threats should be, and threats are usually part of the presentation, right? The competition, what's the marketplace like, and all that. The opportunities are fine. The weaknesses are often downplayed. They have to be acknowledged somewhere, if not in the presentation itself. I mean, nobody wants to get up and say, this is not going to work because of these reasons, but it is important to be aware of them, and it is important to have an answer when somebody asks you, because they usually do, in some, either early on or certainly when you're talking about money later. What happens if, and I'll give you my one of my startup examples. So I what year was it? It was about 2012, I think. We formed an owners association for mobile vendors. Yes, it's a pattern. It's one we'll talk about some other time. The Bay Area Mobile Food Vendors Association. So it was aimed at food trucks and mobile kitchens. We were working with the Southern California Mobile Food Vendors Association, which was already established. So we had our our ducks in a row. And during that time, I was actually building this. Started off as like hey, it'd be cool if, as engineering projects often do, I have as at the time in 2012, everybody in the Bay Area was developing a food truck app of some sort. So you have the Roaming Hungers and you have Food Trucks In, which are they were two of the best known, and they're two of the, they've been around the longest. They have the most longevity so far as I know. There was another tool that sprang up somewhere called the Street Food Finder, which was built by an owners association. I think it was in Ohio. I think that one's still around, and it has some interesting features. But essentially, this being Silicon Valley at the time, me being a software engineer who enjoyed visiting food truck events and all that entailed, of course, you want to write an app, and everybody's using Twitter at the time. And so I built a platform I started building a platform, and then I would go to food truck events and I would show the owners a kind of a demo at the time, some new feature, something that accounted for a pain point that they always had. So my pitch was always kind of a moving pitch presented to people who had the time. I could somehow manage to gain the gravitas that would allow me to enter most people's food trucks and hang out and talk to them before, during, after. So I would show, have a phone, or I'd show them, here, go to this URL and you can visit it's completely web-based, nothing to install. And every time I would talk to somebody, they would present another, feature. My favorite one was this person, his name will come to me, but it was a Thai food truck. It was right near where I lived in Sunnyvale. So I walked over, getting some Thai victuals from this house of, what was it called? House of Siam on Wheels. Yeah. So Hose on Wheels, I think it was the humorous way of saying it. So I was talking to one of the owners, and he said, does this mean I have to enter my schedule in another platform? And it occurred to me that was an extreme pain point with all the people launching these tools, right? Like, just like today with Eventbrite and Meetup and LinkedIn and Facebook, and the list goes on, of all these places to keep events and calendar entries and status of cancellations and event, location and time changes, plus RSVP management. It becomes kind of a chore. Sometimes it takes longer than actually organizing the event, just managing these various tools, and that they don't talk to each other. So I said, you know what? I think my platform would be useful if it became the hub of this stuff and publish all of the data about an event, about a particular vendor at a venue with a particular menu, and so on and so on. Then we could enable other people to build apps. And so I developed a sort of a pivot around that business model component. And the thing that I was not thinking about ahead of time, though, was that at any moment, Roaming Hunger could add that feature, or Food Trucks In. And I think both of those are still around. I haven't checked in a while. They're not really strong in Las Vegas. So these platforms were available for years. They were well known. And at any time they could turn, we'll just publish schedules in a way that other apps could consume. And their business model was all about percentages, right? So they'd book an event. So they were trying to be a broker for vendors at events, right? So by providing the location of vendors, they became well known. They became an authority. I'm looking for a food truck. I know I'll call Roaming Hunger. And great. So these were national, not local. So my view was enable the owners to control that engagement with customers and event organizers, and leave out the brokering. So I was not percentage based. So I had all these differences that I had picked up along the way. But the number one thing that I really didn't think of, because I was kind of heading into it with only the best intentions, but only the strengths and opportunities. The threat was that any of the existing platforms could implement the features I was talking about. Possibly the only thing that would have prevented that was that it would have changed their entire business model. But it was most definitely a threat. It was a threat that would basically undo my efforts if I only had to begin the journey to reach anywhere near where they already were, competing against their established place in the industry, in the marketplace, and the tools that they already had, and obviously the network of customers, their customers. And the weakness that I viewed it as a strength, but it was really a weakness, was that I was a solo developer. I was the engineer, and I would always tell people, if I'm here talking to you, I'm not working on it. And that's always true. So if you are solo, if you don't have a team, or if you're the non-tech co-founder or founder, and you don't have a tech person that buys into your vision, or if you're not even building a tech thing, maybe it's a coffee shop and your co-founder doesn't like coffee, right? That's something to think about. So I never really properly, and even if somebody were to use Google Maps and Google Calendar and probably just a simple WordPress website around that, somebody could have built a reasonable competitor to what I was working on, with just stringing together the tools that are out there. So these were all threats and weaknesses that I kind of ignored. And then I had a house fire, so I stopped working on it, moved to Vegas, started working for Intel. So it's been on the back burner, even when we founded an owners association here, and it was always on the list of we could rekindle this. And then a pandemic came along, so that was an unforeseen threat. So just that experience alone is probably worthy of a better presentation than I've made here. I could construct an actual deck, make a presentation just like I was going to pitch a startup, but I could pitch a failure I can pass along, right? A pass fail. But it has also informed me about other efforts I'm doing and what I should consider and what kinds of weaknesses there are. And I still suffer from the solopreneur. Is that how you say it? Solopreneur. The disease of believing that I can do stuff by myself and not build a team, but the building of a team is critical. And that is something that I would imagine, if we get enough people to talk about their failure experiences, that we will hear said plenty of times. So I think it's a learning experience, not only, in fact, I mean, by the way, the co-owner was a golfer named Matty Diesel, like diesel engine, Matty Diesel. I think that was like a nickname, but he was a reasonably proficient professional golfer. No beverages were named after him, but I guess he was probably named after an engine, but or a famous German inventor anyway. But the ability to tell this story is actually educational for the person telling it, to recall these failures. Because even just now, just recalling these things, I'm thinking, yeah, I could apply some of this to what I'm trying to accomplish today, things I haven't thought about in a while. And maybe this has been valuable for you listening. So who knows? But again, I have put this stuff in the show notes. I have the two links, the CoffeeZilla video and the HBO Silicon Valley clip of Jared explaining SWOT. If you don't watch the SWOT one, it's very brief. The CoffeeZilla video, it is about an hour, but I found it to be completely valuable. It really raised some interesting notions that I hadn't considered or fully considered. The Wantrepreneurialism thing is real. Especially here in Las Vegas, where there is so much discussion, and I'll say there's hype about being the next Silicon Valley. Which is something we're looking at the Genius Roundtable, which is a subject for many episodes in the future. But people are very excited about entrepreneurial endeavors, and they're leaning heavily towards tech. Write an app, get funding, and then exit. Pardon me. So yeah, get your idea up and running, and then leave. And that's not necessarily why people do things. I always say, if I wouldn't start a coffee shop to sell it. I would start a coffee shop because I enjoy coffee or people or being a social hub of some sort. There are reasons to start a restaurant or a bookstore or things that you actually like. Sometimes they're called lifestyle businesses. They're not intended to be exits, not if things go well. But if you owned a bookstore, there was a time when the Amazon, not only Amazon itself, but the Amazon Kindle and the whole notion of electronic books and audiobooks now might have been a potential failure mode until people realized that they missed books. And so it became the weakness and threats of Amazon and Kindles and audiobooks and similar have sort of rebounded and become something of a strength or an opportunity, because there is a return to the comfort of a book, right? As an example. So I think I'm looking forward to rolling this out soon. And I think it's something that people need to talk about more, because there's a tremendous amount to learn. Oftentimes, especially if you're speaking with someone applying the Socratic method to you, you've just told your idea, and they will say, well, what about what's going to happen if Google decides to implement this? Or what happens if one of your competitors pivots and kills your whole idea? And you kind of have to be ready for an answer, but answering that question is only part of it, because that could really happen. That's why they're asking. And from what I'm seeing, not always on the list of things that people consider when they're entering the race or jumping on the on-ramp or beginning a journey, or however you want to visualize it. So that is where I'll leave it today. We're right at about a half hour. That's kind of the target, 20 to 30 minutes. I do want to have guests on, looking at a couple of people to convince them to spend 20 to 40, probably a little bit longer than 30 minutes. A really good discussion could go even longer than that, but we'll see what happens. Clearly, if you would like to be a part of this, I will encounter you somewhere. I'm putting together, as I always am, a website and all this stuff. And that's a whole thing, right? If you can't build your own website, that's something to think about. Will your tools be available for you and all that? And I'm not a WordPress fan. I also, being a programmer, am inclined to try new ideas. And boy, howdy, has building and deploying things become ever more complicated since 2012 even, when I could put up a website on my server at home. And now it's cloud orchestration and which front end and all the things. So complication times 10, and for some people complexity times 10, and that's where having a team and knowledgeable co-founders and all that. And again, whether it's a coffee shop or the next unicorn mobile app, or it could be a unicorn coffee shop. But anyway, these will be topics of discussion actually in person and online and elsewhere. So I will leave it there for today. I thank you for listening. I thank you for sharing this with people, and I hope this has been useful. If this episode is not particularly useful, I cannot stress enough that there will be interactive and more topical and ideally expert-driven conversations around these various topics. So this is really just getting the ball rolling. It's almost as if I'm beginning the journey by myself, and I will add people as long as the weaknesses and threats of having a podcast don't overtake this effort. So on that note, I will thank you again, finally, and that's all. Take care. See ya.